This is part two of our new session of teachings that we're doing on the second coming of the Mashiach, and also the term rapture, that a lot of people say, well, it's not in the scriptures. Well, again, in our past session, I brought out the fact is that the word rapture isn't in our English translations, but the event itself is very well described throughout the scriptures. And the English word actually is caught up, where this is made reference to, and that's really what the word rapture means. It's actually from the Greek word herpazo, which and then it was translated into Latin, then eventually into English. And so you have to understand that the English translations that we have are translations from the original text that we have. Now, and so where the word caught up is used here is the term where we like to refer, or most people refer to that event as being the rapture. So it's just a term that people are more familiar with than if I were to use just the words caught up. So I want to clarify that with you as we continue reading. I was reading in 1 Thessalonians in our last session, chapter 4, and again, Paul's writing here. The Apostle Shaul, as his Hebrew name would have been, says that he would not have us to be ignorant. This is stated in verse 13 of chapter 4, that he would not have us to be ignorant. You know, there's a lot of ignorance out there, and that's why we have to teach, and that's why Yahuwah has put in the body of the Mashiach. Different people have the gift of teaching. Well, I have the gift of teaching, but it's not for me, it's for the body. It's to help the body to grow spiritually. And so it's just a gift that I've been given, not for myself, but for the body itself, to be a blessing to those, and that we might teach, we might be able to expound the scriptures, so that we would not be ignorant, but that we could be taught. You know, the scripture says that that we're to study to show ourselves approved unto Yahuwah, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And so even things that I share with you and teach, I want you to study them out yourselves, because we should not just take man's word for everything that's being preached or taught to us, but we can use them as an aid or guide to lead us, but we also need to go back and do our own study and to verify what's being said. Now, Paul says in verse 14, says, "For if we believe that Yahushua died and arose again, even so them which sleep or have died in Mashiach will Yahuwah bring with him." Of course, it says, "will God bring with him" in your English translations. But we know that the word God is just a term that's been substituted in a lot of places for the Creator's name, Yahuwah. Or the word actually in Hebrew would have been Elohim for this term here, for the Creator. But Paul says in verse 15, "For this we say unto you by the word of Yahuwah, that we which are alive and remain." Now he's talking about, this letter was written to Gentile believers, by the way. These were Gentile believers that had come to know the Mashiach, the Messiah, Yahushua, and had put their faith and trust in him. And these were born again of the Ruach HaKodesh. And so Paul says that that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of Yahuwah, or Yahushua, shall not go before them which are asleep. So he's saying that we will not go ahead of those that have died before us, but they shall be called up first. And again, as I mentioned in our last session, this is also in reference to the resurrection. If you don't like the word rapture, then how about the word resurrection? Because that's what this is talking about. Now, as I mentioned in our last session as well, there's more than just one resurrection. If there's one resurrection of the ungodly, for those that have not received the Mashiach, that will happen at the end of the millennial reign of Yahushua. He's coming back to rule and reign on this earth for 1,000 years. After the 1,000 years are finished, and we'll go through this, and I'll read you the scriptures where this is covered. But the ungodly, or those that have died, without the Messiah, they will be raised at the end of the millennial reign, and this is referred to in Revelation chapter 20 as the great white throne judgment. which you don't want to be a part of. That's why you want to be born again of the Ruach HaKodesh, so you can be part of the first resurrection. Now, when the scripture talks about the first resurrection, it's not talking about first meaning one in number. It's talking about, it's just describing a certain a resurrection in type and not in number, because Yahusha is the first fruits. He's described as the first fruit of the resurrection, being that he was the first to be raised from the dead. And so, but after his resurrection, the scripture talks about over the book of Corinthians that we, as in our own order, are also will partake of the first resurrection. So there's multiple types of resurrections for the righteous that we're going to go into and prove this out. Now, we'll come back to 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, but I want to read now over in 1 Corinthians, where the resurrection is brought out by the Apostle Paul or Shaul in his writings to the Corinthian church. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, starting at verse 49, he says, "As we have borne the image of the earthy, we shall also bear the image of the heavenly. Now this I say, brethren, that flesh and blood cannot enter the kingdom of Yahuwah, neither does corruption inherit incorruption." Now listen, this verse 51 here. "Behold, I show you a mystery." Now a mystery, when it refers to as a mystery in the scriptures, is talking about something that had not really been revealed before. He says, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed." Now let me tell you really what the mystery is. It's not necessarily the resurrection right here, because the resurrection was described and talked about in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament or the Tanakh. So this is not really what he's making reference to. But what he is making reference to as a mystery is that we shall not all sleep, or we shall not all die. Now that was something that was not really revealed, say necessarily clearly in the Tanakh or the Old Testament. However, there is, and we're going to show you that there's some foreshadowing of that event. But actually, the event itself, that we should not all die, but we shall all be changed, was something that Paul was bringing forth as a revelation given by Yahuwah to him to share with those that it would pertain to, those that would be alive and remain at the coming of the Mashiach, of the Messiah, that we would be caught up together to meet them in the air, and so shall we ever be with Yahuwah. Let me continue reading these verses here. In verse 51, "Behold, I show you a mystery. We shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed." Again, this change that he's talking about is the resurrection of those that have died in the Messiah before us, and those that are alive and remain at the time of his coming at this event itself. "In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet," or the word actually would have been shofar, at the last shofar, for the trumpet or the shofar shall sound, and the dead shall be raised incorruptible. Now he's talking about the dead in Mashiach shall be raised incorruptible. He's not talking about the ungodly here. He's talking about those that have died in the Messiah. Now, this relates to the teaching that I've shared with you before, is to not get confused on who's being talked about in the scriptures. I've shared with you what the church is. The church, and again, that's just the English word, but it's, as I've shared with you in our past sessions, Yahusha in Matthew chapter 16, around verse 16 and 17, talked about the fact that upon the revelation of who he was, that he was going to build his church or his assembly, is what he's talking about, his assembly, upon the fact Jew and Gentile believers who would put their faith in him and recognize who he was. Because he talked about in that session there in Matthew chapter 16, Peter said that you art the Christ or the Mashiach, the Son of the living Elohim. And Yahusha said, upon this revelation, Peter, upon the revelation that you have recognized who I am. Because he said that flesh and blood did not reveal that to him, but that his Father had revealed that to him. And he said, upon that revelation would he build his assembly, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. So the church actually began, actually it began when the Mashiach was raised from the dead, and the Ruach HaKodesh was also given to the believers on the day of Pentecost, or the day of Shavuot. In the book of Acts chapter 1 and Acts chapter 2, the church was born. At that time, Jews and Gentiles were given the Ruach HaKodesh to those that had put their faith in the Messiah. And the Ruach HaKodesh is the set-apart spirit. It is the promise of the Father, according to Acts chapter 2, verses 38 and 39. It's the gift from the Father to those that have put their faith and trust in the Messiah, or the Mashiach. And that is the real church. That is the church today that I'm speaking about. I'm not talking about the steeples that you see in the quote Christian churches, or the synagogues, or anything as far as a building is concerned. The real church consists of those Jew and Gentile believers that have been born of the Ruach HaKodesh, that have accepted the Messiah, that have got the revelation. See, the same revelation that Peter had in recognizing who the Messiah was, that he was indeed the son of Yahuwah. And that's the same revelation that Yahushua said that he was going to build his church upon. And this is why this is written for those that are part of the church, to understand that we would not have to go through the tribulation period, because that's a whole different time frame set of events. That's strictly where Yahuwah is the times of the Gentiles is being fulfilled, and he's turning his attention back to Yasharel, to the nation of Yasharel. And we're going to get into this and share with you about this, and this will clear up a whole lot of misunderstanding of what the rapture and the second coming is all about. Thank you for joining me this evening. Please share this with others, and thank you for your support and your encouraging words that you give me. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're not already a subscriber. We have over 450 something subscribers now that subscribe to my channel. And I appreciate those that support me in this. So thank you for your time today, and we'll join again in our next session. Shalom.